So, hey, Kaz, thank you for joining Couch Confidentials. The exact number needs to be, I need to find out which one that is. I think it might be number 9 or 10, but we're definitely getting into the
Okay.
double digits now.
Number 9.
Yeah,
Let's
but
go.
it's been a long time in the making. And the main reason I really wanted to get in touch with you is this trade up program. And I remember when I think I was cooking at the time, and all of a sudden I see this on my LinkedIn timeline, I see the announcement of a trade up program. I was like, wow, this is, like I mentioned in the post, is this marketing genius or is it kind of a pun? But yeah, I mean, this had to have some laughter in the background when you guys were coming up with this. But I think there's a tone of seriousness to it, right?
Yep, of course. So again, just a little bit of my introduction. My name is Kaz. I started Treasure Data almost about 14 years ago. And my background was HPC, high performance computing.
Okay.
And when I was a student, my professor built the world's fastest supercomputer. And I was a part of the team to build the file system for that supercomputer. So, this gigantic computer generates a ton of data. And I was a part of the team to process that data. And that background gave me an opportunity to start this company, Treasure Data. Now is the CDP company. And, that was when I was 25. I had nothing to lose and I couldn't even speak any English, but, we had a lot of ways. But, I think one uniqueness is we actually started as a data platform company who got evolved into CDP company.
Yeah.
And if you look at CDP industry right now, there's a lot of types like it. When one evolved from tag managers, one evolved from marketing tools. And, this is also related to trade up program. But, one thing I don't like is the definition of CDP as a part of MarTech category, right?
That's an interesting perspective.
And we created this vision called connected customer experiences.
Yeah.
And we believe customer data can empower any part of the business because there's no business who doesn't have any customer. Every part of your activities is related to the customer. Why you're limiting the use of data just into marketing? That's our perspective. So that's why I think what's unique about us is we're solving bigger problems. So for sure, we're going to start from marketing efficiencies, but then there's a lot of automotive company uses CDP in the dealership so that they can actually convert more by helping those like a dealership sales rep. Same for retail associates. Same for banking in the banks, retail banks in everywhere, right? We also work with a lot of compliance teams. We also have customers optimizing supply chain based on the customer data by forecasting the demands, right? We also work with a lot of support teams who is trying to use customer data, web behavior, real-time interactions to solve the problem quicker, right? So, the thinking behind is one, I just kind of those like, okay, there's a lot of failed CDP implementation and I couldn't believe it because, fundamentally your business has customer. And then if you have that data, there's an ROI associated with immediately. We can do that in 4 to 6 weeks. And if you have failed implementation, you either didn't have a use case in mind or 2, you just have a bad vendors. And we can help you both because, looking at our customer base, 96 to 7% of retention rate. We know what to do with your data, how to turn your data into the dollar, right? So we just thought, what, we need to do this for the world, right? 1, helping those failed implementation, and 2, bring bigger vision so that they can use customer data across all of the enterprise, not just marketing, right? So let me stop it and if there's any question.
No. I'd like your perspective on that CDP and MarTech. You're right. MarTech, short for marketing technology. But indeed, if you look at the power of what you can do with that customer data, it goes way beyond marketing. And you mentioned a few cases here. You mentioned customer service. You're doing supply chain support there. Even one case that that you mentioned around banking. And for some reason, I had to think back to my mother. She used to work in private banking and she was a receptionist.
Oh,
And they had a system in place where the clients, they had their own pass for the door. But as soon as they used that pass to get into the hall of the reception, she would get a pop-up on her computer about who this client was,
yeah.
topics to talk about, topics to avoid. And and this we're talking probably around 20 years ago. It's definitely
That's
nothing new.
CDP based.
That's CDP in the very early ages, but it goes to show that marketing technology is probably also the wrong categorization of what this technology finds itself in. I mean, CDP is a highly disputed label right now. We're seeing that. I know that Michael Katz, for instance, and Particle, he's talking about CDP 2.0, the differentiation of all, the people, the CDP companies. I'm really getting bored of this word CDP now, but they need to differentiate themselves. And how are they going to do that? We're already seeing this, and I think treasure data is definitely one of them. Oh, quick question though. Being from the Netherlands, I had heard of treasure data, and I'm just wondering, how big is the footprint of treasure data in Europe at the moment? I know it's very North American focused. You host CDP World there, which is still on my bucket list. But in terms of deployments, and I've heard from someone in India who's working with you guys, but truth be told, that's a Canadian deployment, by the way. But how are you guys look towards internationalization of treasure data?
That's an interesting question for us, which is, we have about 600 people, so probably one of the largest independent vendor, right?
Yeah.
And
600,
I
that's a lot.
fundamentally believe that the problem we're solving is exponentially big in the large enterprise, especially with multiple brands with global footprint, right? So if you have just one business line in one country, yes, you have maybe some customer data silos, but it's not big enough. One of our customer, AB InBev, they have 500 beer brands across, almost 200 countries.
And Anheuser-Busch, yeah.
I have the Busch, because they produce 60% of the beer on the earth. And majority of brands comes from the acquisition. And each brand is almost like a different company. But then you want to have unified customer data, right? To answer your question, yes, we can actually attribute the revenue into each region, and it's probably around 25% for Europe. But at the same time, in a lot of cases, a lot of our customers, they actually implement CDP in one of the regions, let's say North America, and then go to Europe and go to Asia, or what we're doing for certain specific global automaker is they rolled out CDP 5 countries for the first year, and the second year that's 20, third year that's 50, right? So the sweet spot for treasure data probably is a little bit different from others because we're specifically targeting for those global rollouts and then enterprise companies who wants unified global customer data.
Yeah.
Right. So that's our sweet spot.
And how doesn't that make it challenging though, if you look at the trader program? I was just looking at the website before I came on just to make sure that nothing was changed from my previous visit.
Nothing changed.
1 to 2 months. That's, you already mentioned it, 4 to 6 weeks. There has to be an underlying premise there that the data is structured properly enough, or that something needs to be there because 1 to 2 months is quite ambitious.
Yeah. So, first of all, there are, I think technical differentiation and also second, implementation methodology. So first of all, treasure data is a schemaless architecture, which is a little bit technical jargon, but what that means is we don't enforce any of the data model to our customers, right? Yeah. If you go to, let's say, Salesforce, Adobe, maybe some other vendors, they have this like a really complex schema. You have to transform your data onto those schema, and then CDP starts working. But then this approach takes 18 months to 2 years to get the value. Yeah. Right.
That's because their internal systems are program to perform better if that data is modeled in their favor. Yeah.
Right. But it's almost impossible to do that within a certain time period. Treasure data takes a different approach. So we did that like 15 years ago, which is schemaless. So dump everything you have, and then you can build a data model, customize it within the platform. Right?
Yeah.
So each 400 of our customers, by the way, they're typically paying $500,000 a year. So we're talking about those big enterprise, right? Yeah. So they have, custom data model. They have custom schema. So my belief is like, okay, we can't build a perfect model for every single one of them. Rather, let them configure it, right? So that's why we can do 1 week POC just to prove the value, right? And then 2, whatever the data model they have, we just take it and unify it and then make it available, segmentation, activation, then journey. Sometimes we do 1 day POC if it's too simple, right? So that's one technical advantage. The second is like, I'd say in terms of migration, a lot of people talks about how do you unify the data, but I'm just suggesting don't think about data. That's counterintuitive, right? Okay. I always push go for use case first. Yeah. So in a lot of cases, let's say, if you're spending, $100 million for Google and Facebook digital advertisement, we typically see maybe 10%, 15% of the ads actually get shown for the existing members or buyers. So let's just suppress it. And we can save 10%, 15% instantly. Yeah. Right? That gives you 10 to 15 million ROI. Just give us 1 million and I can do it in a week. So the migration doesn't, mean you have to move all the data. It's all about you have to show ROI quicker and better and faster, right? And once our champion or buyer can actually show, this solution and implementation can accelerate the ROI, then you can add more use cases, more data, and more advanced use cases, right?
Do you ever come across situations then when, let's say, treasure data has been rolled out successfully for one of your major clients, that at some point you say, hey, look, the transformation of that data, especially if you're working with different countries. In the past, I did some work for LeasePlan, and LeasePlan was doing data collection activities independently in all major European countries. So trying to grab that data, put it together, and kind of build out a dashboard at the time, let alone data collection, was quite difficult. How are you comparing apples to apples from one country to the other? So my question for you is, at what point after treasure data is successfully implemented do you start looking at, all right, we don't want to put too much strain on the transformative part. Do we need to start looking at the source? Do we help guide customers into improving their data quality at the point of collection?
Yeah. So I guess, first of all, if you're going with digital advertisement use case, you don't have to have like a perfect data quality in a lot of cases. Yeah. But then if you go to CRM use case, like email and all these with more regulated countries like Europe, like GDPR, then you have to have that strict rules, right? Yeah. So you can almost do a phased rollout of, depending on which countries and region you're targeting for. We typically go with, okay, let's go with one brand, one country, which is the easiest. And then you can go with multi-brand in one country. And if you can templatize it, you can go to multiple countries after that. Right? So there has to be a rollout plan, right? And in a lot of cases, we just don't roll out to the entire enterprise. We just prove out in one country or one brand, and it's just gradually rolling out, right?
Yeah, and you kind of break down the barriers for other countries. It's quite common that each country will have their own kind of guidelines to what they want to use in terms of their data stack. And I can imagine that one country is using Adobe or Salesforce or any other brand, and here comes treasure data in, let's say, in America. How do you, you're kind of building up your own ammunition to win these arguments against the other countries. Do you still find a lot of resistance in trying to convince some of these countries in kind of making sure that the entire enterprise is on treasure data? Do you really need to
Right.
take that game to a board or executive level?
Yeah. So one of the probably things which is different from other CDP, maybe for treasure data, is we're selling into strategic horizontal organization buyers,
Okay.
right? In a lot of cases, MarTech is, I would say, more like tactical buyers.
Yeah.
But then CDP, especially on this like enterprise side, it's a horizontal play. So it's actually really, really hard to get in because you have to go through RFPs. Almost 90% of our deals is through RFP. And, they are like these 250 vendors selecting into one, right?
Sorry, 250. I've heard of 20 vendor RFPs, but 250?
Yeah, well, that's the universe of CDP,
Yeah, okay.
right? And then going down to maybe 10 to 20, and then do maybe POC 1 to 2 vendors and then prove it out. This is a long process.
Yeah.
But once it's in, you're in. And our contract length is about 3 years as a default. So we have a really thoughtful plan with the buyers, right? So in a lot of cases, we talk with chief digital officer, chief marketing officer, compliance, legal, CIO, obviously, and sometimes CEO. So, I would say it takes a lot of efforts and time, wise treasure data versus, well-known brands in the initial, phase.
Yeah.
But once it's in, because we already convinced a lot of C-levels, they're all about rolling out as quick as possible to many of the countries.
Yeah. And you get a lot of just out of interest. You also get like a lot of word of mouth referrals. I mean, you have 200 clients, or sorry, 400 clients. They must definitely talk to each other. And it's, that's usually a kind of the way. Yeah, it's a smaller world than we think.
Right. There's one champion who gets promoted, then, they're going to give us more use cases, right? What I'm saying is like, okay, one person, our champion in charge of just marketing, but then marketing in charge of customer experience as a whole. So it's maybe customer support is now rolling up, right? And then they're also supporting sales side and all these. And then all of a sudden, okay, now compliance is under because those are tightly integrated together. So that's one way to get more scope to achieve this connected customer vision. The other way is, yes, people just move around in the enterprise, so we get referrals too.
Yes, all of a sudden I was thinking, since treasure data really goes on a broader level, like you said, it's very horizontal. What team usually starts the initiative of talking to a representative treasure data? Since you're not only focusing on MarTech, like you said, MarTech is kind of the wrong label for a CDP to be in because it's so broad. Do you also initiate discussions with people from, let's say, customer service?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I don't have a simple answer to that because so if you buy $500,000 on average software, you have to have a lot of stakeholders. And in a typical deal cycle, we have more than 15 contacts making decisions, right? That's across marketing, sales, compliance, security, sometimes like board, private equity who owns that, right? So I would say one thing I can say is like, okay, in a lot of cases, use cases driven by marketing initially, IT and security comes in, but then, we need to convince a lot of people.
Yeah. Do you get involved personally in a lot of these negotiations?
Yeah. So 1 million plus, I'm trying to flying in. So I have 72 flights a year.
Wow. So. Yeah, it comes with benefits though. I've heard of, I believe it was Martin King's story on being kind of this platinum level customer with, I think his story was around American Airlines. And I remember my dad having one too, where he just gets picked up at the gate and driven around to his next flight. It gets pretty crazy, but, with so many flights, I can imagine you want a little bit of comfort to, it's definitely not back in cattle class.
Yeah, and also I'm supporting one of the airline company.
With so many flights, definitely.
they're the customer, I'm using it. So that's a win-win, right?
They're not wearing treasure data swag when you get on board then, I guess. Not yet. So, I mean, there were these jokes floating around on LinkedIn after this was announced. And I believe I was speaking to someone and it was a New Yorker. I don't want to name him, but if I say New Yorker and working with CDPs, it's probably easy to guess who that might be. And he was saying, what you might, or what you probably should do is kind of get the cheapest CDP out there, get a contract in, and then do the trade-up program and get into treasure data. If they're going to at least acknowledge the existing contract and then make a switch into treasure data. Have you come across like any attempts or people wanting to do the trade-up where you're taking a double look at, you seriously want to do this, or people who might not understand what treasure data is about?
Well, no, I mean, our buyer is like really, really sophisticated buyers. So, there's like procurement officer comes in, negotiate and all these, right? So they're trying not to do those tricks.
No, okay. Yeah. Professional negotiators.
Yeah. They're like, so our customer is like 5 billion plus in revenue.
Yeah.
So it's not like small business owners, right? And they make decision for next 3 years. So that's probably one of the contexts we should probably give that to that messaging, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
And if someone maybe $100 million revenue comes in, we typically disqualify it. So we just a product and company is not designed for those small businesses.
Yeah.
Now, again, I also fundamentally believe the value of CDP exists in the enterprise, not the small companies. So while CDP is hot, they might want CDP, but then, at some point, if you're not proving the value, you just turn.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So I'm just fundamentally believe enterprise is where we focus on and winning. And I'm putting a lot of resource on this segment, and we just say no to the other segment.
Yeah. And so do you feel that the schemaless approach has been the key for you guys, or your background with data processing, as you mentioned?
Yeah.
Why have you guys been able to crack that nut and not necessarily the others?
Right.
How do you see that in terms of your competition now?
Yeah. So I would say, this is how I view the market. So let's start from SaaS in general.
Yeah.
Right. So there are almost 1,000 unicorn in 2021. And I would just call it like a Cambrian period for SaaS, right? 2010 to 20, you solve this little problem and you got to scale to maybe 50 million, 60 million AR company and you get a unicorn status.
Yeah.
And that's what happened, right? With all the interest rates, all these happen, the valuation gets shrunk. But, in the end, what's happening is in the public SaaS market, last 5 years, they spend 50% more sales and marketing as a group, right? But then they actually get 10% less annual recurring revenue, ARR, compared to 5 years before.
Okay.
What that means is they're spending a lot of money on sales and marketing, but the yield is getting decreased. The oxygen is getting thinner and thinner because the time is getting limited, right? If we're in the environment where if software market is growing faster than we can capture, then more sales and marketing means more growth.
Yeah.
But that's not the case anymore. You have to spend more just to get more oxygen from adjacent vendors, right? So in general, point solutions are dying because my thesis right now is, okay, you solve this little problem, but it's not enough. The buyers are now looking to solve larger problems.
Becoming more mature.
Right? Yeah. So there's two strategy you can take right now, which is related to your comments. One is you become the cheapest solution in the category and become a good enough solution. That's one definite strategy, right? But that's commodity. And it's also true that, if you look at a lot of SaaS company, no customer is using 100% of the features. That means everyone's becoming feature creep, right?
Yeah.
What customer wants is now you can solve bigger problem. That's what they're looking for, right? That's the second strategy. And that's what we're driving for. And we're here to replace maybe 6 to 7 to 8 software you have, but then consolidate into CDP so that you don't need those points of systems. We can solve enterprise-wide problems. It's more like, divisional, interdivisional, let's say, workflows, approvals, permissions, compliances, securities, and, analytics, right? So those problems exist because, there's a lot of point solutions. They don't work together.
Yeah.
Now, if someone comes in and says, you know what, we will give you a solution to manage permissions, approvals, and workflow across multiple, divisions with a unified customer data, the customer will pay for it because that's something treasure data can only solve it. That's how you stay premium, right? So
Yeah.
I'm guessing next 5 to 10 years, a lot of SaaS companies gonna struggle or almost die after conversion period, right? Because you have to solve this bigger problem. If you're evolving from point solution, you have to build platform underneath and then adding more solution, and that just takes time and an effort.
Here's a question. Sorry to interrupt, but you're talking from the vendor perspective. How do you survive then? And you rightfully mentioned, feature creep. You're just trying to look like your competition. You're setting yourself out to be different. But the product itself, the CDP, has been, according to a lot of research and personal experience that I've seen, so difficult to implement, to get right, to get enabled across an entire organization. So as you rightly point out, vendors are in danger, but what about companies? What have you seen potentially around the fact that companies are struggling to enable these type of products? Is it a culture problem that marketing is not talking to technology, not talking to customer service, not listening to external experts, et cetera? What are the risks for companies who don't embrace this type of technology, regardless of what level, if it's the cheapest one or if it's treasure data?
Yeah, I would say, one thing I really don't understand is like, okay, you have $100 million digital marketing spend. CDP can optimize 10% at least, right? It's just a simple concept. So I think people are thinking too difficult.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
People might say, that's too simple for CDP. No, it's just the value you can provide in 4 weeks and tell that to your CEO or boss. And then you can think about next 20, 30, 50, 150 use cases.
Yeah.
Right? So I just feel like when IT and technology people comes in, it becomes all of a sudden more technology discussion. But I would argue that it's always a business solution, turning data into the data. And someone who can turn the data into data should drive this conversation. Otherwise, you become this like scientific project, no matter how good the vendor solution is.
Yeah, no, fully. And there's a lot of, sorry, go ahead.
No, so the key really is just, for us as a vendor, we just have to guide our buyers, okay, always driven by the business. And then from buyer's perspective, yes, technology is important, but, the purpose of this project is really driving the revenue, reducing the cost, become more compliant with all these like privacy laws. Those are the 3 goals, right? Remind that, keep in mind, right?
Oh, and it just reminds me that now especially with AI, and I want to kind of dig a little deeper on how treasure data works with AI, but it's also with the customer 360 view, the golden view, and that there's a lot of, I run into customers saying, we want to chase that unified view. But the same with AI, they're walking down this path, values on the right-hand side, but all these buzzwords on the left-hand side, AI, unified profile, and they're like, we need to chase this. We need to go down this path. And sometimes it's hard just to say, guys, just look to the other side. That's where the value is.
Yeah.
A customer 360 profile, a unified profile is great, but don't keep chasing it. Don't try to continue putting effort into it like you're trying to find a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. At some point, you need to say, as you rightly say around ad suppression, there are very basic use cases that you can achieve right now. And yes, if you can save a company 10% with an ad suppression use case, I'd be happy to take half of that and go in there and set everything up and take 50% of that fee. It's that simple. The value is just laying on the ground, ready to be picked up if you're willing to embrace it as an organization.
And I think for AI, when I talk with a lot of customers, there's still a hypothesis, but two types of value AI can provide, right? And also a little bit of vendor's point of view. First of all, in the sales and marketing side, Salesforce is probably around 35 billion in revenue. But then in the sales and marketing as a whole, there's like $1.2 trillion of labor cost just in US alone.
Yeah.
So 40x of Salesforce revenue. What if we can actually optimize, let's say 1% of sales and marketing people? If you're working, let's say 8 hours, 480 minutes, if we can optimize 4 minutes, 5 minutes every day, that's about $100 billion economical influence. That's like 3 Salesforce worth of economic influence.
Definitely when looking at the macro view there, yeah.
And I think Gen AI already optimized 1% of my job every day.
At a minimum.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think the biggest opportunity for the buyers and also the vendors like us really is the labor cost, right? And I also would have to admit that any software vendor, you're spending $1 to software vendor, but you always pay like $3 to $5, sometimes $10 to manage, implement, and operate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think even Avinash Kaushik talks of the 10-90 rule, 10% for your technology, 90% for your humans. Yeah.
What if we have 10% for software, 10% for agent to operate, manage, and implement it, but then your labor cost becomes maybe 30%? Then you get, half of the cost to manage and operate that software stack, but then vendors' revenue goes up like double, right? So I think the biggest opportunity is like unlocking that, labor cost. And that's what I'm thinking. The next one, which is a little more than technical view, is especially something like B2C. Let's say, every single second, your employees interacting with customers and every website, emails, right? So think of it as an interaction. What if we take all the data in, put that in AI, and right now a lot of LLM doesn't have a long-term memory? What if it does have long-term memory at some point?
Now you take all that unstructured data.
Then the AI will understand all of the historical interaction with all of the customer last 20, 30 years, every single touch points.
In that sense, yeah.
Right? And then this AI can probably empower every single employee. This AI maybe does like automatic decisioning if you only want AI to run anything, right? So it's just like a really powerful concept of, how do we build your own AI and a custom model within B2B? That's kind of where I'm thinking over time B2B side of the AI is going to.
I live in the Netherlands. We're in Europe. And I think even yesterday, a law was passed that says if a company is making use of AI in one form or the other, they need to be AI. They need to be able to prove that their employees working with AI are AI literate. And there need to be certain, I don't believe it's qualifications. I need to read the exact announcement somewhere. There is a lot of talk about workforce protection around AI. And I fully agree with you. There are those people who say, hey, AI can replace humans. There are people who say AI can improve human productivity. But I am fascinated by the information you just shared around Salesforce, 34 billion a year, but they're, the kind of, is it the consultancy industry around it?
No, it's all sales and marketing people in the industry, just in US.
And that's for 1.4 trillion.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
What if you,
That's just really big. So, all I'm saying is like, okay, when I think about salespeople, I'm just saying, there are probably preparing for the meeting 70% and selling in 30%.
Yeah.
Right? Matthew, you're probably producing this podcast 70%, 30% maybe having conversation like this.
Yeah.
Right?
I use solutions to make sure it's exactly.
What if we can flip it? If salespeople can spend 70% selling, 30% prep with the help by AI, your productivity goes like 2x.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm just saying, it's not all about reducing workload. It's actually more about, human can actually become 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x more efficient. Right?
Yeah.
And the value we can provide is already proven if you can optimize just 1%. Right?
Yeah. But how does this story tie into what Treasure Data is offering now in terms of AI? Like you said, it's enterprise focused. I guess I hope it never shows up as a work what do you call it, a job opening requirement, needs experience in Treasure Data, because it's really hard to get experience with the solution. But
right,
so I'm trying to get a feel for what does Treasure Data currently offer in terms of AI. I've read something about segmentation analysis and creation.
Yeah.
What can we expect further down the road as well?
Yeah. So right now, as of today, what we're offering is more around co-pilot model where, we're helping growth marketers create segment and journey and activation, right? That makes them productive.
Yeah.
But I would say the long-term thinking is in two ways. One is, okay, if you're spending $1 for Treasure Data, you typically $3 to $5 to implement, operate, and manage it. How do you make it much more easier to implement? Like, okay, we're talking about, couple weeks to replace it. Can we have agent to implement CDP, suggest use cases, implement in 3 minutes? Right?
Wow.
That's a huge time saver.
Yeah.
Against, if we can provide agent as a service plus software as a service together, that's a powerful position to be in. So that's more on the SaaS side of enablement. But ultimately, it's all about, if you go to retail industry, automotive industry, CPG industry, a lot of our customer has like 40,000 people, 50,000 people. How can we make them more efficient? At the same time, but what I'm worried about is the society is getting also aged, right? So especially like, Japan, where I was born, next 20 years, maybe around 20% of workforce is gone because we're aging too fast. And I think US population is kind of getting plateaued, China too. And then I think India and Africa will probably the only one who's growing, right? But imagine, if your economy is growing, but your population is not growing, your efficiency per head has to grow, right? Otherwise you can't have economic impact. Now, I would say, I think AI will have a significant impact on that.
That's an interesting point of view. Yeah.
Yeah. And then for the Asian countries like Japan, you have to run the business 20% less people in next 20 years. What you're going to do? One of the banks I was talking, they have 50,000 workforce. You have to run with 40,000 people in next 20 years, and they have no idea what to do. I mean, AI probably is the only way to go, because then you can, augment your workforce with the AI teammate, I would say, right? And run the company with less people, and that you have to do it, right? So there's a lot of piece about, humanity and society. AI can help on that. So I think that's probably the ultimate unlock for this technology wave.
Oh, it's definitely an interesting view of looking at the declining birth rates in some of these regions around the world, that AI could definitely jump in there and replace some of that workforce that will be retiring or simply passing away, the natural path, and still be able to keep up at the same level of production. Yeah, that's interesting. I've never really looked at it.
Sorry for talking birth rate and all these in MarTech podcast, but
I mean, I don't think you need to apologize for that. Marketing, we are driven around technology. We are still humans. I love that other podcast, humans of MarTech. What a great name. But it definitely is playing a role. And I sincerely believe that AI is going to change, and companies need to, I often refer to it as the arrow of time from the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. Time only goes one way. And with the
Yeah.
advent of AI into the business world, there is no way back. We need to embrace it. Companies need to learn how to embrace it.
Yeah.
And it isn't always necessarily the negative side of things that you need to lay off workers because you found other ways to be more productive.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a
Like
new.
when we had Google, right? You can't go back.
You
You
can't.
know?
Well, there are alternatives. Yeah, well, yeah, Google. No, but no, you're right. I mean, but we just need to move with. I personally believe that we as a generation also need to make sure that our kids get educated around we're talking about humans and birth rate. My daughter is going to go into a course for multimedia design and IT. And I
Yeah.
already know that at a high school level, they won't actively be talking about AI. So I'm going to take it upon myself for the next 2 years to educate my daughter about
Yeah.
what is AI. How can you,
Yeah.
like you said, augment your productivity, your workflow? Because
Yeah.
as soon as you go into the workforce, AI is going to be there. AI is in almost every CDP that we see now, any type of MarTech solution, it's on. If my mother is sending me AI generated articles about, because she typed in who's Matthew Niederberger and she gives a full rundown
Right.
from Grok. Hey, if my
Right.
mother's doing it, everyone needs to be doing it.
Yeah.
But it's great talking to you. And like I said, I'm not seeing treasure data a lot in Europe. I'd love to see that because the way you see it is describe it as a schemaless solution for enterprise companies.
Right.
There are a lot of interesting companies.
What is interesting is Europe has the highest expansion rate across all the region. You know why? If you roll
I have
out
my theory.
CDP,
But please tell me yours.
okay. If you roll out to one countries, then next 20 to 30 is inevitable. And we have this really good feature of market level access control, multi-market rollout features where you can actually templatize one market and just quickly roll out to many countries.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
No,
that's just like,
absolutely.
I really like that fact. There's also multi-language, right?
Yeah.
So by using LLM, you can actually start talking with your customer data in French and Italy, English and, all these languages, Polish, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of complexity human can, LLM, AI can solve. But, obviously regulation obviously is an interesting part where, they pay a lot more attention to customer data.
And that's just Europe. I mean, if you talk about regulation into the Middle East, it becomes a whole different playing ground. My theory around the popularity of CDPs in Europe is just with this commodification of the market, a lot of players are becoming more affordable, and you're seeing some maturity in these small, medium-sized businesses who want to start doing more with their data. So they're actually starting to investigate the smaller type solutions. But again, the Netherlands is a very inventive country and a lot of big companies here. So I'll definitely see what I could do around finding some more treasure data customers, because I'm intrigued to get started on treasure data, schemaless. And like you said, the horizontal approach, things need to change for companies to really start accepting.
Yeah. If you're top 100 companies in Netherlands and I'm watching this show, happy to talk.
Yeah, definitely. Reach out to Kaz. I'll put a link in the description. Kaz, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been different speaking to you, talking about treasure data, the enterprise approach, and also the impact of AI. Now, you've mentioned a lot of things that I'm going to kind of process now. It's been really great picking your brain. And this is one of the biggest benefits of this podcast is that I get to spend 1 hour one-on-one with some of the greatest minds in the industry. So thank you again.